I've been asked where I get the ideas for my stories, and I take the advice that I read somewhere. Write about what you know. So, for example, in the following story, which is called Edith, my maternal grandmother Edith was always called Edie. My paternal grandfather lost his automobile dealership during the Depression. My aunt and uncle lived in Sydenham in South London, and their garden included espaliered apple trees. And I did an internship at St Joseph's Healthcare in Guelph in the Alzheimer unit. So with that, the story is called Edith. Edith, that's Edie Leonard, sits alone in her room at Maple Court, the retirement home where she's lived for 5 years. She's always been called Edie as long as she can remember. Now she's aged 92. She has mild dementia, as is common among people of her advanced age. Very likely she'll have to move next door to Maple Lodge as her dementia progresses. That's to say, if she lives that long. Maple Lodge is the long-term care facility that's the counterpart of Maple Court for residents who require nursing care. As on most mornings, we find Edie hunched over one of her old photograph albums. With failing sight, she holds her magnifying glass in her left hand, leaving her right hand free to turn the pages. At this moment, she moves the glass to bring into focus first a young woman wearing a summer frock, and then as she repositions the lens, a very young girl over whom the young woman is bending. The child is seated in a pram in a garden. They're shaded by a row of espaliered apple trees. Edie struggles to remember who these people might be. They look familiar, perhaps because she's looked at the album so many times. Perhaps the child is her daughter Dorothy, who died so young, but she's not sure. In reality, the photograph depicts Edith herself, aged 18 months, with her mother. The date is 1929, and the location is the garden of a fine Victorian-era house in Sydenham, South London, England, which is where Edie was born. Fragments of the real remembered world float in and out of Edie's mind, jostling with images from other times and places, as well as some without a factual foundation, as in a dream. Edie's short-term memory is by now almost non-existent, leaving her with no recollection of what she ate for breakfast today, or indeed whether breakfast was served at all. Then, for a brief moment, 1929 snaps into focus, and she remembers that this photograph is of her mother and her infant self. Now she remembers the rows of apple trees trained on their wires like children holding their hands out. She does not remember the summer of 1929, she was too young, only what she was told when she was older. It was the last great and glorious summer before Father lost everything during the great crash in 1929 to 1933. His automobile dealership failed when the former customers for marques such as Lancia and Lagonda had more mundane purchases, such as food and clothing, uppermost on their minds. The fine home in Sydenham had been sold at a knockdown price. Who wanted to buy a place with such expensive upkeep when so much of that kind of property suddenly came on the market? Edie's family, father, mother, brother Arnold, herself and later Constance, always known as Connie, had moved to a much less palatial abode on Sydenham Road, close to the Golden Lion public house. One of her early memories was the day that the auctioneers sold off most of the furnishings of the house on Laurie Park Avenue, leaving it empty and echoing, and her mother in tears. On the next page of the album is a photograph, presumably taken by father, the family of the little garden of the rented house in Lower Sydenham. Edie was 5 or 6 at the time. She remembers her first day at school, when her mother had taken her into the classroom, introduced her to the teacher, Miss Fairbairn, and abandoned her to a sea of other small boys and girls, many of them equally lost. Every morning began with school prayers, and the singing of all things bright and beautiful, which was sung every day until the not yet literate pupils knew the words by heart. Edie turns more pages in her album. The photographs in black and white have not faded in the same way as Edith's memories. She cannot understand why there's a colour photograph of people, her family perhaps, standing on the deck of a large ship, whose red and black funnels spew smoke into the distance. This picture and the ones on the next pages were taken in fact on the Cunard ship Saxonia, built for the Liverpool to Montreal transatlantic service. The family decided to move to Canada, where Edith's brother Arnold had emigrated after the war. There he'd established a trucking company out of Toronto. Edith's father, now approaching retirement age, had agreed to look after the financial side, while Arnie expanded the business. Although in reality, it was Edith whose business acumen was needed to keep the books straight. The next few photos were taken at the modest family home in the Long Branch area of Toronto, where the extended family settled. Edith has no trouble in recognising the next photograph, to which she turns. The man and woman are herself and her beloved Stanley on their wedding day. Also included are several other pictures of guests at the ceremony and the subsequent reception, though their names elude her. Later pages are filled with colour photographs. Unlike the black and whites that preceded them, their colours are so washed out that Edith could have been forgiven for not having been able to place the people in many of them, even if she were dementia-free. She squints at a whole series of scenes that include a young person. These all include her son Grant, from infancy through high school. Eventually the photo gallery comes to an end, as Edith turns the final page to the blank back cover of the album. There are no more photographs, and Stanley and Grant are also both no more. Stanley, her husband, died in his 60s of colon cancer, and Grant was tragically killed in a boating accident shortly after his marriage. Edith has long forgotten the name of her former daughter-in-law, actually Anne, who remarried some years later and moved out west with her second husband. Time has been kind by dimming the memories of these tragedies in Edith's mind. 3 years pass. Edith Leonard sits in her wheelchair in the second-floor lounge at Maple Lodge. Television is on, showing some daytime programming, but Edith is entirely unaware of what the flickering images represent. 3 other residents are in the room with her. None of them speak, for they neither have anything to say nor the ability to say it. Edith has no idea how long she's been living at Maple Lodge. Her photograph album is back in her room. Her staff member Dolores is thoughtful enough to turn the page every morning that Edith can see a different set of pictures. But sadly, Edith has lost all interest in the contents of the album. Its images now mean nothing at all to her. Last week, Anne, her daughter-in-law, who was in Toronto visiting friends, made a special trip to visit her former mother-in-law. Edith did not know who she was and ignored her, while Anne attempted to make desultory small talk. She will not be visiting again. His grandson, Tyler, comes in from time to time. More importantly, Tyler has Edith's power of attorney. He makes sure that fees are paid up at Maple Lodge, that Edith now has a few little extras like appointments to the visiting hairstylist and the manicurist. Although she is unaware of them, it's important to Tyler that his great aunt is kept looking nice, because it's really all that he can do.